Well, you're going to get a handout coming around here. If you're a note taker, feel free to kind of take notes. If not, the other side's got some resources that I'll mention there as well. So I realize, though, here we are. This is the last workshop of the day. Maybe you're starting to experience some of that conference fatigue. So I'm not going to be offended if you need to get up and stretch or yawn or get a cup of coffee or something like that. But my name is Eric Nygren. I am the associate pastor here at Bemidji, and I am currently in my 14th year of ministry. Spent 13 years in EFCA churches in Iowa, and then this last August came up here to northern Minnesota, and so still trying to learn my way around in the Bemidji area in northern Minnesota and get used to the colder temps and things like that. But no, it's been good. And so I got asked to do this workshop on technology, and Matt talked a little bit about technology in the last session. So I hope to kind of piggyback off some of that. So less in the area of worship, and we're going to focus more on building community and outreach. And I've been kind of a tech guy all my life. I'm kind of one of those guys that, sometimes people talk about a parent that taught them how to, work under the hood of the car or, work in the wood shop or something like that. Well, my dad was a guy that brought home computers. And so at a young age, I was tearing apart computers and building computers, building my first PC at about 12 years old and, teaching myself HTML programming language to build websites when we were still up on dial-up modems and things like that. So I kind of eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff. And as we get into it this afternoon, unfortunately, I'm not really going to be able to do tech support here during this time. So I'm not really going to be able to get into how to set up a church website, or I'm not going to be able to help you send your first tweet, or how to make your smartphone smarter, or one of those things. We can talk about some of those things afterwards. You can shoot me an email or something like that, and I'd love to help you out if I can on some of those things. But what we're going to focus on today is we're talking about three things, really our thinking here. The first is thinking theologically about technology. We'll get into that here in a moment, what that means. And then we'll get a little bit more practical. So the two areas we're going to focus on this afternoon would be thinking strategically about social media and then thinking wisely about church websites. I think Matt was mentioning alliteration. I'm a pastor, preacher, so I've got to make it memorable in your outline there and a 3-point message here. But I do want to offer some practical tips, some encouragement, and hopefully we'll leave some time here at the end for some questions. It looks like we go to about 1:15 before we wrap this thing up for today. But let's get into it. So I think the right place to start before we get into the practical how-tos really is to lay the groundwork and to think theologically about technology. And maybe that's kind of a hard one because, obviously if we search the scriptures, it's hard to find, especially if you're talking about digital technology, you're not going to find it there. And yet we want to say, well, certainly if the scriptures are there, God has given us everything we need to know about how to live in this world and how to do ministry and to glorify Him through the things that we do. Certainly the scriptures speak to the issue of technology. And so I think that a theological, thinking theologically about technology it's not just limited to whether technology can be used for evangelistic purposes. So if I say, we're thinking about technology theologically, I'm not just saying, how does it help us with outreach? I think that's a component of it. But to go back even further and to say, what is this thing that God has given us called technology? And I'm deeply indebted to a book that's called, and I think it's on your resource sheet on the back of the sheet I gave you, The Next Story by a guy named Tim Challies. Tim is a pretty well-known Christian blogger. And this, I think, is now the first edition of this book. Came out in about 2011. I believe it came out into an updated second edition in about 2014-15. That's how quick technology changes. That a book that was written in 2011 has to be updated 3 to 4 years later. But he does a great job in here on helping us think theologically about technology. And certainly there's some other resources there, and we'll get into it, about smartphones and internet and social media and things like that. But this really does lay the groundwork here, and I think that's a key resource. So one of the things that Tim says in this book here is he gives us a definition of what technology is. And we'd say that technology is the creative activity of using tools to shape God's creation for practical purposes. And I think Matt in the last session used that same key word, that technology is a tool. It's God's creative activity of using tools to shape God's creation for practical purposes. So what we're saying is technology is something that it's a good thing. You know, often we associate technology with sort of the evils of technology, and we'll get there. But that God has some purposes in this. And I want to read just a little bit longer passage about this in his book, where Tim says this. He says, God made us creative beings in his image and assigned us a task that would require us to plumb the depths of that creativity. He knew that to fulfill our created purpose, we would need to be innovative, developing new tools and means of utilizing the resources and abilities that he had given to us. In other words, obedience to God requires that we create technology. And think about that. Obedience to God's command to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And part of that is that we would, in his image, create technology. This tells us that there is some inherent good in the technology that we do create. Whenever we express our God-given creativity by coming up with something that will help us be more fruitful, that will multiply and promote human flourishing in a way that honors God, that we act out of the imago Dei, the image of God in which we were created. That this is true whether or not a person is a Christian or knowingly fulfilling God's design, that even God's common grace, the grace that he extends to all people, whether they love and obey him or despise and abhor him, empowers us to express our creative impulses. So what he's saying there is part of this common grace of what God has given us is this ability as human beings to be creative and create technology to shape practical purposes. Whether we're believers or not, God gives us the ability to come up with these things. And we could point to thousands of things in human history that say, these really have helped toward human flourishing. I mean, you can look at things like the medical field, medicine and surgery and things like that, just how far we've come in that. And it's not all Christian believers who have come up with these things, that God, by his grace, has allowed us to do these things. Certainly, we can look at another side there, but just to kind of set that framework. So this idea here that just as God created, we create, God has given human beings the ability to think, to come up with remarkable ideas, to be innovative. That technology is simply the practical result of the creative process. And he goes on to say human beings create because of a God-given ability to be creative, and the practical result of our creative activity is something that we call technology. And so again, I think Matt was talking about that. I mean, technology, we think of it automatically in current 21st century digital technology. But even going from scrolls to books was an upgrade in technology in human history. To go from hand lettering to printing was an upgrade in technology. And so with that, though, as we look at this, there's some main points we want to kind of look at. That first of all, that technology is a good God-given gift. In itself, technology is a good God-given gift. But with that, the technology is subject to the curse. So this is we can look at technology through the lens of Genesis 1 and 2, but we also need to look at technology through the lens of Genesis 3. That this is often where we get the greatest pushback against technology, even from non-Christians, in that technology can be used for evil. We know that. But then from a Christian worldview, we also recognize that technology can become an idol. It can be something that I begin to give more of my attention, even my adoration, more than God. And so we have to be wise about that and recognize that that is a reality of living in a fallen world. As we bring any good thing that God gives us in, we can, because of the curse of sin, we can defame it. We can take it in a direction that God did not intend for us. So that moves us a little bit beyond the specific topic of how we use technology, but it is also just a reminder that the very same tools that we will use for ministry certainly can be used for evil. So as we get into this topic of social media and websites and things like that, it doesn't take much imagination to know that the non-believing world can use these things for terrible purposes. But we're going to use the same technology in a God-honoring way, in a way that promotes the gospel. So what that means is that technology requires discernment. And this is where a lot of these resources help us out, is to think theologically about what we're using and why we're using it. So, for example, a couple of books that I listed on that resource list that I would recommend that move a little bit away from the specific topic we're looking at here. One would be the book by Andy Crouch that came out just last year or a couple years ago, The Tech-Wise Family. Just a wonderful book on thinking about how technology is shaping us, especially in the life of the family. So whether you've got kids at home or not, it's a great book to help think through that. It's certainly more practical for families with kids at home, thinking about how do we introduce some of these good technologies that God has given us into our family and yet not let it go the other way and become a distraction and become an idol. The other one that's similar, but I think is more broad spectrum, would be this book by Tony Reinke. Came out a couple years ago, 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. A fantastic book. It's an easy read, not a real big book, but he's done all kinds of research, and it's amazing to think about. I mean, just even us and our smartphone usage and how the world is shaping us. I see folks with cell phones right now probably looking up on Amazon the book, right? That's what I do, right? But it's an amazing thing. So I would recommend both of those books. But as I say this, technology requires discernment. Let me give you a practical example. In our household, I've got 3 girls. I've got a high schooler. I've got a 10th grader, a 7th grader, and a 4th grader. And the 2 older ones do have phones. The 3rd one has an old phone with no service on it. But we are a family of devices. And one of the issues that keeps coming up with especially our 10th grader is whether or not she can have Snapchat. And I don't know if you know how much about Snapchat, and I won't get into a lot of the gory details, but we pretty much put a ban on that. And that's a hard one to try to explain without explaining to a 10th grader who's moving away from sort of the innocence of childhood. But I don't want to tell you all of the terrible things that are on Snapchat. I just want to keep you away as a parent from some of these things. Now, I also know folks that use it. I'm not trying to shame anyone from having Snapchat on their phone. But we've had to discern, which things are okay, which things are not okay. We've had to learn about things like parent permissions. We've had to dig in. And I consider myself a pretty tech-wise person. But there's things that even my kids know about that take me a minute. And I have to say, hey, can you show me how to do that? And it's amazing how quickly some of these things change. So discernment for individuals and families is a part of that. And then certainly as pastors and ministry leaders, we need some discernment in what we do and how we do it. A good friend of mine that I was in ministry with for a while is a pastor that does not have a Facebook account, even though most church people do. And he just said, I just don't want to get into that world. And it wasn't a, right or wrong kind of thing, but for him it just didn't work. So we as pastors and ministry leaders and even key volunteers in churches need to have some discernment in how we're going to use these things and whether we're going to use these things. And then, of course, what we're talking about today is, how do churches then delve into this technological world? What are we going to adopt? What are we not going to adopt? How are we going to know what we're doing, if it's something good, if we're just being, carried along by the culture, or are we sort of setting the terms? So hopefully that lays a little bit more of that groundwork, and I would encourage you to think through some of that. I know it's easy to jump to I just want to learn how to use, Facebook for ministry purposes. But before you can get there, you've got to think through theologically, how does this work? How is this tool that God has given us? I'm not necessarily saying God has given us Facebook, but God has given us technology and God's given us minds. God gave Mark Zuckerberg a mind to be able to create something like this that could be used for good purposes and can be used for evil. So let's keep going here. Let's talk about social media. So the first part I want to kind of hone in on here is thinking about social media. And I was kind of interested in that. When was the term, we use that term all the time now, social media. It was coined in about 1997, somewhere between 97 and 99 is when they say it sort of entered the English language, social media. And to just give you a little bit of perspective, Mark Zuckerberg launched the Facebook on February 4th of 2004. That's only 15 years ago. That's only 15 years ago that the Facebook changed the planet. There's an interesting book and then movie that came out a number of years ago on sort of the history of Facebook. View it with your discretion, but it's an interesting kind of look at that history and how that evolved. But anyway, this is the world we live in. And so as churches, we need to think strategically about social media. And I'm going to argue that, certainly that can start with we're in or we're out. And that's a fair decision on the part of individuals and churches. But if you're in, how do we get in and what should we do with it? So let's get a couple of things here. First of all, let's just understand, how pervasive is social media? How much of it is integrated into our culture, into the world, at least the American culture in which we live and we work? Well, when we think of the top 3 or 4 social media sites, we look at a picture like this and our minds go to things like Facebook or maybe Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram, some of these. Did you know that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of sites on the internet that are classified as social media? And there are many, many that are not things that we will see or use in the United States. But for example, a couple of years ago I was in India, and one of the revolutionary things to me is, even in a very impoverished area, everyone has a phone, and everyone has a smartphone, and everyone has a Facebook account, or one of these other social media platforms. So worldwide, social media is absolutely pervasive. And so here's a couple of stats. 7.7 billion people in the world right now, roughly. So just under 8 billion people living on planet Earth. 4.2 of those billion are internet users. So half of the world's population are internet users, regular internet users. Just a little over 3 million are active social media users. So 3.3 billion people on this planet at any one time are using a social media platform right now. And that the average amount of time, and this is probably for in the United States, 116 minutes a day spent on social media. Now that can be swayed a little bit depending on if you define YouTube as social media. Some do, some don't. The statistics on how many hours of video people are taking in each day is astonishing, especially when you stop and you record yourself and you think, well, surely I don't. But just, the things add up over the day. So just a few statistics there. Now, a couple of more. 91% of retail brands use 2 or more social media channels. So we're not a small business here. We're not a business here in the church, but it's probably similar worlds. 91% of retail brands use 2 or more social media channels. So about any retail brand that you can think of, they probably at least have a Facebook page and probably either a Twitter account or an Instagram account would be my guess. And probably more. So for example, there's some ones out there that are actually quite fun and interesting. I'm a heavy Twitter user, and so which is kind of on the probably minority sometimes of social media. But Wendy's restaurants is notorious for their Twitter feed. Quite funny. I would have brought some slides of some pictures. I mean, they're out there trolling McDonald's and things like that. I mean, it's really funny how they use it. But whether, the ethics of it or not, they're getting engagement. I mean, there's people that are following Wendy's restaurant's Twitter feed just to see what they're going to say next, whether they're a fan of their hamburgers or not, right? So they're getting smart about these things. 81% of all small and medium businesses use some kind of social media platform, and 79% of all U.S. adults use Facebook. Look at that. Roughly 80% of adults. And that's a pretty wide age spectrum, too. And that's growing. In fact, anecdotally, my teens don't use Facebook and have no interest in Facebook because that's for old people, they say. This is a platform that was invented 15 years ago for college students and was exclusive to college students when it came out. You couldn't get on Facebook if you did not have a college email address. And now, it's for old people. In 15 years. So, in other words, we live in a world and a culture that is saturated with social media. And this is the world in which your people live in. This is the world that your people work in. This is the world in which your people that you're trying to reach live in, right? So whether or how you engage them, you have to understand contextually that it's as if you were a missionary coming into this culture and you were saying, where would I find these people? Well, you'd find them on social media. And so we just sort of need to understand that. And as one writer says, social networks provide one more avenue for non-believers and believers alike to connect, engage, and share. And that alone makes them a worthwhile tool for churches. She goes on and says, and with intentionality and prayer, churches can avoid the temptation to focus on clout and start harnessing the power of social media to connect with people inside and outside of the church in meaningful and lasting ways. So I think what she's getting at, and I would resonate with this too, is social media can be a great opportunity to connect with people, believers and non-believers. It's not just about building our brand. And there's a part of that. And small business, some of that's part of what it is building your brand and getting your brand identity out there. To some degree, we can bring that over into the church, an awareness of we exist. But really, it's to connect. It's thinking strategically about how do I connect with people who are engaging in social media. How do I connect with those who are, this is the world that they live in. And so as we do that and we start to think through our strategy here, the first thing we would want to do is to determine our social media audience. And what I mean by that is kind of what we've already kind of said. It's what platforms are your people using? Are you in a church where everybody's on Facebook or nobody's on Facebook? Or one of these other platforms? What are people using? And not only that, why are they using it? Depending on the generation you ask, well, I use Facebook to keep an eye on my family that lives all over the country, and I want to see their pictures regularly. Or I want to keep connected with friends and see what's going on in their life. I sort of want to eavesdrop on what's going on. Other people, it's more about sharing, or, I like this platform because they're always posting great articles, or they're always posting really great resources that I can get on and read, devotional literature, something that really kind of builds up my faith in Christ. I know that's going to be there every day I log on, right? So in our house, again, we're kind of a techie family. I'm a Twitter user. I use Instagram a little bit, somewhat of Facebook. My wife, though, is all Facebook, and we've not gotten Mom to get on Instagram yet. We tease her all the time. You're missing out. This is where everybody is right now. It's Instagram. Get off Facebook, get on Instagram. And yet she's now discovered this platform called Marco Polo. I don't know if you've heard of this thing. I haven't figured it out, but she loves it. It's basically you record a video and you send it to whoever you want. And then they, Marco Polo, that they send a video back to you. So throughout the day, she's getting these sort of almost like video emails, is the way I would, and she loves it. So she keeps up with her college roommates every single day. And, they're telling each other about their day and, what to pray for and these kinds of things. So there's always these platforms. My kids, though, my two teens, it's all Instagram, no Facebook, and tons of YouTube. And then my 10-year-old, it's all YouTube. That's all. She wants to she said, Dad, I think someday, whatever my job is, I also want to be a YouTuber. So that's part of it. I want to be a YouTuber, right? So in other words, you need to determine your audience. And I don't know how you pull that or you figure that out in your church or the folks you're trying to reach or even in your community, but where are the eyes? If you're going to invest in a platform, are people actually engaging in that? And with that, don't join every social media platform. Like I said, there's hundreds out there. You don't have to join all of them. You don't have to feel like your church website or your bulletin or your signage says, we have all these little icons that show we're on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and Snapchat and YouTube and all this. You don't have to do them all. You really don't. Just be strategic in what you choose. Again, I'm a Twitter user, but I am in no hurry to set up the Twitter feed here at this church because I'm not very sure that there's many people here that would engage with that. I'd be posting into the wind, and I don't know that anybody would be reading and engaging with that. So that leads us then to this, I think is the most important point on this, if you're going to delve into the realm of social media, is developing what I would call a social media strategy. So it's one thing, you've created your account, and you're going to say, now our church has a Facebook page. What are we going to do with it? Are we just going to sort of recycle our bulletin announcements? How are we going to use this? And I would say this is the thing that makes, if you ever see, pages and things like that, when you look and you realize, well, they haven't posted anything in 6 months. The last thing that you see there is the summer picnic, and it's January. And I'd say part of that is because there's no strategy. It's sort of when something comes up, we'll post it. But that's not being strategic. Now, you can go the other direction and say, I'm going to post 27 times a day, and people get annoyed and say, we don't want to follow you anymore because we've seen enough of your stuff. But asking questions like, are we going to try to post original content, or are we just sharing content? There's other people out there. So we read this article over on this other website, and we say, yeah, that resonates with what we're talking about. Let's post that. We found a great image over here with a nice Bible verse. Let's borrow that and post that. So we're going to do original content? Are we going to do recycled content? Are we just going to share? What degree of each? The next question you start to ask is, well, who's going to post this? Is it a key person? You probably don't have a staff person that's dedicated to, most churches don't. You don't hire somebody for social media probably, unless you're a huge church. So who is authorized to speak for your church? Because this is where it gets you into trouble, is if somebody says, well, I think that's valuable to post. And once you've posted that on your church's Facebook or Instagram, your church endorses it, right? And, there may be things, especially if it's politically driven, that you might say, we don't want to have anything to do with that. Or that's just not a well-written article, or that can be, that image can be taken the wrong way. So really having a discernment of who's going to be authorized to do that, who's going to generate the content, and who's going to post it. And then how often, a posting schedule. Am I aiming to just, once a week get something up there, a couple of times a week? Do I want to shoot for something every day? Do I want to shoot for Facebook and Instagram and something else every day? That gets cumbersome to come up with all of that. So the best way I've found to do this is just grab a monthly calendar and start mapping out what you want to do and plan it out. So I'll say, this day I want to kind of, like Wednesdays here is kind of our kids and youth night. And so usually like on Wednesdays will be the day I want to make sure that morning, hey, don't forget kids, we're doing this, or this is what we're doing special, because I know people's eyes are going to be thinking about Wednesday night. Or Sunday afternoon or Monday, I'll probably grab a line from the sermon, maybe grab a passage of scripture, grab a line from a song we sang, and I'll post it because I want to kind of keep that in people's memory Sunday afternoon, Monday morning or something. So I'll just plot that out on a monthly calendar. Monday's going to be kind of a Sunday review. Maybe Friday or Saturday, you might say, well, here's the songs we're going to sing on Sunday. The set list or whatever. Gives people the opportunity to listen to some of that music over the weekend. And then, hey, this is what we're going to sing on Sunday. So just being creative with that, but taking a monthly calendar and then plotting that out. And leave some blank days. Don't feel like you've got to do 7 days a week, because that's a lot of work. But then thinking through, okay, what topics are taboo? Which ones are we just not going to go there with? We've decided we're not going to do anything that's politically driven, regardless of ideology, or we're just not going to touch these taboo topics right now. It's up to you and your church, and you sort of discern through some of that. Let's see here. Another quote that I think is helpful here. Through leveraging social media and a simple online strategy, you can reach almost every person in your community through the screen on their phone. I would resonate with that. In fact, one of the things that we've been doing and I've been learning about is Facebook ads. So we've recently been paying for, and there's a paid thing, paying for some local advertising for our women's Monday night Bible study here. And then you watch the statistics and you see how many thousands of people saw that advertisement. Now, we're not getting thousands of people coming to our study, but thousands of people in our community saw that advertisement. So it just reminds you that this is true. It spreads, and people are that connected. So you really are engaging a community, not just your church members, when you engage in social media. So let's quickly get to websites because I want to be able to open up for some Q&A here too. A little bit briefer, but I think this is also something we need to think wisely about, thinking wisely about church websites. Tom Rainer just came out with a book, I think it was last year, Becoming a Welcoming Church. I'd highly recommend that little book. I mean, it's not just about technology and websites. Wonderful little book on becoming more of a welcoming church. Easy read. In fact, we bought like a couple cases of them and gave them out to a bunch of our people just to help us to be more of a welcoming church. So one of the things he says in this book, he asks this couple a question. He often asks this question, well, what led you to visit our church? Often the answer is, we visited the church's website. Anecdotally, I would say that's true. In fact, this is interesting. So in our bulletin, we have kind of a connection card where you can tear off and people can say, hey, I was here for the first time, give some basic info and whatnot. One of the things we recently changed on it was, how did you hear about us? And a little checkbox that says website, social media, friend, or other. Just this Sunday, I got one back from someone that said, heard about you from your website. Left their email address. I sent them an email. Hey, thanks for joining us for worship. Mentioned some other things about our church. Emailed me back and said, thanks. We've been listening to a number of the sermons online already. And just, reminding us that this is how they found us. I don't know how many people are using Yellow Pages and things like that anymore. But not only are they looking where are you located, they're sizing your church up based on what's on your site. So if they have the ability to listen to sermons, if they have the ability to see some pictures. In fact, I would say probably the question most people want to have answered before they come to your church that they want to find on the website is, what are people wearing? They want to know, because I don't want to come casually dressed if everybody there's in a suit, or vice versa. And if I can see some pictures of what normal people at this church look like, then I can know, can I come and fit in? Do want to know things about service times and child care and nursery and, Sunday school. And I think those are valuable questions. But, a lot of times it's just, what's my experience going to be like when I come? Am I going to feel awkward? Or am I going to feel like I fit in? And I think that's valuable info on a website. So 7 out of 10, this is Tom Rainer, says 7 out of 10 guests will go to a church website, and that is a determinative factor in where they're going to choose to visit. In other words, they're not just going to find information, they are deciding based on what they see on that website whether or not they will show up Sunday. Now, I can't tell you what magic information to put there to get that person to come, because I think you want to be honest. You don't want to bait and switch. You don't want to use beautiful stock photos of all these, families, and then they show up and none of the people there look like that, right? But it is determinative. And you know that, too, if you've ever been on a website. If you're shopping and you get on a website that just really looks poorly done and shady, you're not going to enter your credit card information. You're going to go, let's see if Amazon has it. You're sizing up a restaurant, and should we go to visit this restaurant? We're going to go down in the Twin Cities and we're going to go to this restaurant, right? Well, let's check it out. Or we're going to visit this hotel. If it's a really terrible website, I'm already drawing conclusions about that business. I'm going to move on to the next one. Same thing is true of church websites. Now, here's some tips, though. Build this into your budget, very much like in the last session where Matt was talking about microphones and technology. You got to build this into your budget. It's hard to do this completely on the cheap. You could do it inexpensively, but you do get what you pay for. But building it into your budget, because that starts to say it's a priority. We're going to build this in. And maybe that's the thing over time, that budget increases as you see, a lot of folks interacting with it. It becomes a value to your church. You don't have to go the whole 9 yards and spend a ton of money to get a great website, but you are going to have to spend some money. I mean, there's just a little bit to it. And trying to do it on the cheap just often doesn't work. With that, borrow good ideas, but don't steal work. Very much like we were talking about copyright in the last session. Go look at what other churches are doing. I do that all the time. They've got great ideas. Oh, I would have never thought about putting that on the front page because that's what people are looking for. And I'm not going to copy their information, but I'm going to say, well, how would we say that here at our church? How would we communicate that here at our church? But don't steal their stuff, especially, graphics and videos. It's easy to, hey, I'm looking for a graphic online. I'm looking at Google. Oh, that's a great picture. I want to use that on our website or in a sermon slide or something like that. Don't do that. Because there are tons of sites out there that have free resources that are available for you where, creators have said you could use this freely, but you've got to kind of have these terms if you're going to use it. You might have to attribute it, or you might say, well, you can do this, but you can't change it. These kinds of things. There's tons of resources out there. A lot of them are free. Sometimes you have to buy some stock images and graphics and things like that. They're not terribly expensive. But again, we want to be people of integrity. You can do that. You just have to do a little bit of work there. There's some great companies now that'll sell some packages of graphics and things like that, subscriptions where you can get in and download all the graphics that you want for a monthly fee or a yearly fee, and you can use that freely. And then just be ready to invest the time. I've seen it so many times when a church says, yeah, we're going to launch a website or launch our Facebook page. And then we've not thought about what we're going to put up there. And it's just under construction. Or we quickly post, the thing, and then we don't have anything for 3 months. So just invest the time at first to think through what I wanted to say. So maybe there's not a lot of content on your site, but the content that's there is done very well. So invest the time into that and say, okay, what do we want to say? And don't just cut and paste. Don't just take your church documents and cut and put your mission statement up there, and cut and put your bylaws up there. Think about how you would engage somebody. People's attention span anymore is so short. What can I say in a paragraph or in a couple of images that's going to capture some attention and lead people to ask some questions, not just dumping content on there. We don't need nobody wants to read your bylaws online. If they really want to know your bylaws, they'll come get it. Maybe your doctrinal statement or something like that. But, take the time to know what to say and how to say that. Yeah, so let's open it up to some questions here, and I'll do my best here to kind of point you in the right direction. Any questions, any thoughts? Yeah. Yeah. Correct. That's talking about folks that you're taking pictures of. So yes, we do some of that too, and I think that's important, especially if you're doing children's ministry, if you're taking photos, so that you've given parents, families the opportunity to sign a release and say, it's okay to just say, hey, we're going to take photos and you need to opt out. So just know we'll post what we take unless you explicitly don't want us to. Or working through, we're starting with live streaming here. Right now we've got it just so that the who's at the podium is on the video. But eventually, hey, if we're going to do a pan shot of the audience or the crowd here, to say, just so you know, there's a camera, sort of like a security camera at a store. You're on camera, and if you don't want to be, you might want to sit in this section over here, or just let us know, and we'll do something about that. So yeah, just thinking through that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a realm that I think, again, is changing. And Facebook has its own kind of privacy rules and things like that. And depending on who you ask, they're a little wishy-washy on privacy. But that intention of Facebook Live is more to capture the moment in public. Something's happening. So my understanding is the more that you have it planned, it's sort of in copyright where it's that, what do they call that? Where, kind of the spur of the moment kind of thing. Oh, I wanted to show you this real quick. But if you planned on it, if you're planning a service, if you're planning on it, you're starting to go, well, you had time to think through issues of copyright and stuff like that. So it's a platform that wasn't designed for live streaming worship services and things like that. I don't know that Facebook cares whether it's putting eyes on Facebook, so they're glad to have you do it. But I think looking through and thinking through, especially with music and those kinds of things, and I think, legally, it's one of these, especially with copyright, most often the copyright police are not going to come to your church. And it's really easy to kind of get into that sort of, we're in a small town somewhere. Nobody's ever going to care or know about this. And that's probably true. But, it just sort of gets to that. Did I plan on it? What am I putting on there? Am I willing to spend the money? That's a good question, though, of what can we and what can't we. But a lot of what it comes down to is, did I go as far as I think I could? Maybe you don't get all the rules right, but I was trying. I at least tried to get people that was going to be on camera to sign a waiver, or we tried to limit who we would show, or we tried to block out when we sang, or we tried to only broadcast public domain songs or something. I think as you start to have a strategy and a plan to that, these are things that we're just going to have to work through. But again, some church somewhere has already gone through this, and usually a larger church. Ask them what they're doing. Find a church that's doing it and doing it well and say, can I see a copy of your policy? And often they'll say, sure. Other questions? Yeah. Personally or for the church? Okay. I got 2 minutes. Okay. Depending on the week, I try not to invest a ton of time. It's not a high percentage of my job description, and it can run away with you really quick. So that's where I do try to have a plan, and that helps me minimize that. I don't know that I want to, or that you need to probably spend much more than 30 minutes a day. If you have a good plan, probably a lot less than that. Even today, I'm walking around snapping pictures at Rekindle, and things like that. Probably should have had a waiver, but thinking through that, and do we want to just show for our church, hey, folks, we hosted this conference here. I'll just grab those and I'll put those together. It'll take me 10 or 15 minutes, but I already have a plan on how I do that, and I already have those apps set up. I don't think that you probably want to spend hours doing it, because part of social media is just the authenticity. And so I don't need to go and polish my pictures and my video and all this. We like just sort of raw pictures and video. And so for me, it's probably a rule of thumb, and I probably don't do it every day. But I try to hit at least a couple of posts a week, and probably spend no more than 15 to 20 minutes on it, trying to do that, yeah. Correct, and that's a beautiful thing too, is to schedule that. Especially for me, I'm not usually in the office on Monday, but I'm thinking strategically that everybody else is going to work. Monday's my day off, but everybody else has got their eyes on taking their first Facebook break, with their first coffee break, mid-morning. Yeah, to schedule something, that's a great time to just, again, that passage of scripture that was preached yesterday, post that. Use scheduling. Facebook does a good job with that. There's some other third-party tools that can help you do that. Sometimes you do have to pay a little money, but to think through that, yeah, I don't have to do it on the clock. I can just find a time, or I can spend an hour and schedule the week's worth of posts and get it done. So, all right, I think we're out of time, but feel free to, we can chat afterwards, shoot me an email, or find me on Facebook or something like that, and we can chat more. So thanks, folks.